Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy little human being you, welcome to my channel and welcome to today's Morbid makeup video. I'm so happy we can meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this craziness today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing a woman named Alison Botha. And Alison, at 27 years old, she survived the unsurvivable. Seriously, when I was researching this case, it affected me in a way that a lot of cases haven't, just simply because of what she lived through. Lived, like how? But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. And you can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you want. They're both BRATTERSTEIN, but no pressure. Okay, so now that I'm done begging you to join my cult, we can get into this video. Now this is a case that was suggested to me by a bunch of subscribers actually, because I put a post on YouTube asking for some suggestions for some international cases, because I want to branch out and not just do so many American cases, though those are the ones that I've heard of the most because American here. I want to branch out, and I know I have some subscribers in South Africa, so I was like, I would like to do a South African case. So a big thank you to those subscribers who suggested this case: Michelle, Heather, Jen with one N, Christy, Kirsten, Sia, and Pauline. Thank you for the suggestion and also for the actual nightmares. I cannot believe that with so many people suggesting this case, I had never heard of this case. It had never crossed my path. I don't think I'd ever even read even a little bit about it, because trust me, I'd remember. And now that I have learned about it, I will never be able to get it out of my head, I don't think. And the more I read about it, I was just like, what the fuck? The more interviews I watched with Alison where she described what happened to her that night, I was just like, what the fuck? It just really infected my brain so much that I even tried to tell my husband about it. I sat down and I was like, let me tell you what happened to this woman. And as soon as I started talking, I got into like the first thing they did to her. And he was like, okay, yeah, no, I don't want to hear anything about this, because it is so not his interest. True crime just makes him sad. So I was like, okay. I just have a lot of information in my head, a lot of details. Some of the most horrendous things I've ever heard in my life. And now I'm going to get them out of my head. I'm going to tell you about them. And if you haven't heard of this case, buckle up. Shit's fucked. Simply put. Put it on a t-shirt. Shit's fucked. With all of that said, I'm going to tell you the story today. And while I do, I'm going to be putting on a full face of makeup, hence the makeup and Morbid makeup. Now, if that's not really your thing, that's cool. Thanks for hanging out this long. I hope you find a channel that covers a story in a way that you enjoy. But if you're on the fence, if you're not sure how you feel, maybe stick around. You could be surprised by how much you like me. And now, I just want to stop talking about it and start being about it. So come, gather around, and let me tell you the truly unimaginable, unbelievable survival story of Alison Botha. Okay, our story begins on a normal summer night in 1994 in South Africa. Alison had just had a very long, fun-filled day in the sun, and all she wanted to do at this point was just get in bed, crash, call it a day. So she had just gotten home, she parked her car, and then reached over to her passenger seat to grab some of her things to head up to her apartment. As she did, her driver's side door gets ripped open, and before she can even react, a man has a knife to her throat and tells her to move over or he'll kill her. And thus began a horrendous night that would change her life forever. Alison Botha was born on September 22nd, 1967 in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. Her parents divorced when she was only 10 years old, so she spent most of her childhood living with her mother, Claire, and her brother, Neil. When she was just a little Alison, she had a pretty normal life. She served as the head girl at the Collegiate High School for Girls in Port Elizabeth, which I believe is sort of like student body president at schools in America, which is odd because she says that she wasn't particularly good at anything in school, though she was given the title of head girl. So I think that she, in general, is just a bit on the modest side. Once she had finished her required education, she studied secretarial work for a year, just trying to kind of like find out what she wanted to do with her life. She was young, she didn't know what she wanted to do. She wanted to have a fallback job because she always sort of felt directionless in her life. Even as a child, she didn't really have dreams or goals. She wasn't really living, just simply existing, which I feel is actually pretty common for a lot of people. She ended up actually spending 4 years of her life traveling all over the world, trying to see what the world had to offer and to kind of discover herself. And after she returned home, which made her mother so happy to have her back, she found a job as an insurance broker. And somehow she actually liked her job as an insurance broker. Not to say that like being an insurance broker wouldn't be an enjoyable job. I'm just saying like, I feel like most jobs aren't particularly enjoyable. Maybe that's just my personal experience, but do you actually like your job? Just a thought. This hardly matters, but let me know what you do down below if you like your job. Or you can tell me you can tell me what you do down below if you don't like your job. Either way, question of the day. Anyways, to get back on track, now that I've told you a little bit about who Alison was prior to this evening, let's get into that evening, the evening that this horrible, absolutely horrible thing happened, and talk about the specifics of that night. So, the day in question was December 18th, 1994. Now, if you don't already know, December in South Africa is actually their midsummer. So it was a typical midsummer day, nice and hot. Alison and a group of her friends spent the day at the beach, just laying in the sun, getting all tan, getting all sleepy. You know how exhausting a day at the beach can be. And after finishing the day at the beach, her and her friends went back to her apartment to get some pizza, play some games, just have what sounds like the absolute best night you can have in your late 20s. Am I right? Like that sounds exactly like the kind of day I'd want to have, though I would want to go home first before like continue with my friends to take a shower so I didn't feel like a sticky, salty mess. But regardless of my opinion whatsoever, this is what she did that day. It's mostly just to illustrate, you know, what sort of night she had had and how fucking exhausted this poor girl must have been. So anyways, the party broke up and Alison was nice enough to give the last party goer a ride home that night. So she drives her friend home. While she's there, she picks up a bag of clean laundry from her friend's house. Apparently her friend must have had a washing machine or a laundry room where she did not. So she had her clothes there. She picked them up, she put them in her car, and she headed back home. Once she got home, she realized that her normal parking spot was taken, so she drove down a bit farther and she found another parking spot that was in a dimly lit area. Once Alison was parked, she reached over onto her passenger side of her car to grab that bag of clean laundry to take upstairs and finish off her night. But as soon as she did, which she hadn't locked her doors, she says in hindsight, like, I should have locked my doors. We women need to protect ourselves because these men keep wanting to kill us. But either way, she reached over to grab those clothes, and as soon as she did, she heard her car door open, the driver's side door, and a man had a knife to her throat, giving her no time to react at all. It was just like door, knife, that was it. And he said, quote, "Move over or I'll kill you." So he had her move over. He did not let her get out of the car. He just had her move over to the passenger seat and he started to drive. The man driving Alison's car identified himself as Clinton, but this man's real name was Frans du Toit. And he just kind of tried to help Alison relax. He made small talk with her. He asked her if she had a boyfriend. He lulled her into a false sense of security, telling her, you know, I don't want to hurt you. I just need your car for about an hour. Now, why he brought her, you know, would be kind of a giveaway. If he only needed the car, why didn't he let her go? But he didn't. And at first she felt like, okay, he doesn't want me. He just wants the car. And she felt kind of okay. But this wouldn't last long, because shortly after this, Frans, Clinton, picked up another friend. This was a man named Theuns Kruger, and as soon as he got in the car, Alison knew that she was in trouble and that everything that Clinton had been telling her wasn't true, because this guy definitely seemed to know what was going on. It wasn't like a chance being picked up. What? That's not a good sentence, but you know what I mean. He knew what was going on. And he had just some off energy, man. He made her feel very uncomfortable. And as she looked at him in the rear view mirror to see him in the back seat. And she said it chilled her. All she saw was cold, dead evil. And she knew at that moment that she was not going home. The two men then drove with Alison for a long time. They drove past all the city lights, all the lights that offered her some sort of comfort and hope, and drove until they were in a deserted area in the desert, or the bush as she called it, far outside the city limits. And once they got there, they stopped the car and they said to her that they were going to rape her. And they asked her if she would fight them. And she said to herself, like, fuck, man, like, what am I gonna do? I'm out alone in a secluded area in the middle of the night, out fucking in the middle of nowhere. There's no one around. I have no way to escape. Where am I gonna go? Running out into the middle of the wilderness? And she thought to herself, if this is what they want, if all they want is rape, I can handle rape. I can fucking handle rape. So she tells them that no, she won't fight them. And that's when they take turns brutally raping her in her car. First was Frans, and Frans forced her to perform oral sex on him. And then he did the same to her. And she said that her body responded. And that she knows now that that was her body's defense mechanism. But at the time, it felt like her body, like the ultimate betrayal of her body to have her respond that way. When he was done, he then raped her after, after that, Theuns came over and Frans was like, would you two like to have sex with the fair lady? Like, really, he was like strangely trying to make it into like not a horrible thing that he was doing at the time. And Theuns responded with, no, I want to fuck her. And I guess at that point, Frans like scolded Theuns for talking that way to and about and in front of a lady. Just so weird, dude. Theuns then raped Alison in the car. And in the commission of the rape, he started to strangle her, which did end up making her black out, but it was unsuccessful in killing her, though she does believe that was his intent. And she was thankful, actually, that she was unconscious at that point because it made her not feel most of her attack after that. So at this point, the men were hoping they could have killed Alison by just strangling her, but it wasn't working, and they were becoming frustrated by their lack of success. So this is when they pulled out a knife and started to stab her. Alison was stabbed in the abdomen at least 37 times, which resulted in them disemboweling her. And during that attack, Frans said out loud that he wanted to destroy her reproductive organs, even though they were planning to kill her. So it's not like it would have affected her in life. It was just adding to the horror of what they were doing, because clearly this man just hated women. When they were done stabbing her all those times, they took a step back and looked at her and saw her leg twitch. So assuming she was still alive, they then took the knife and cut her ear to ear and slit her throat 17 times. 17 times. Alison said of this moment, when her neck was being cut, and I quote, all I could see was an arm moving above my face, left and right and left and right. His movements were making a sound, a wet sound. It sounded like my flesh being slashed open. He was cutting my throat with the knife, again and again and again. Alison also added, quote, it felt unreal, but it wasn't. I felt no pain, but it wasn't a dream. This was happening. This man was slashing my throat. The men then, who were seemingly satisfied that they had completed the job they had set out to do, started stepping back and sort of admiring their work. Alison could hear them talking to each other as she laid on the ground, and she said that they were speaking Afrikaans, I believe is how you pronounce it, which is a language that's spoken in South Africa. And they were just like, kind of like, oh, look what we've done. And kind of asking each other like, oh, do you think like, that she's dead for sure. And the other saying like, oh yeah, there's no way anyone could survive from that. Because truly, how could anyone survive from that? That's what's got my head all messed up on this case, is how could anyone survive from that? The two men then left Alison for dead. They drove away in her car, throwing her clothes out the window as they did. And for another fucked up side note that's just like, ugh, after they got caught, because spoiler alert, they get caught, Frans tells investigators that the morning after they did this, Frans and Theuns had been together having breakfast. And Theuns was the one cooking said breakfast, and that he had used the knife that they had just used to nearly decapitate and disembowel Alison. And he had used that to make breakfast while there was still like blood on the knife. Anyways, back to Alison. So the men leave, rightfully assuming, reasonably assuming, that they had murdered Alison. But somehow, guys, somehow, she was alive. How? You fucking tell me, I have no idea. I will never understand how it's possible, but she was still alive. And she lay there on the ground in the dirt, beaten, bloodied, bruised, destroyed, naked, listening to the sound of her own labored breathing, because when these men cut her throat, they had severed her windpipe. And she decided at that moment that she was gonna die. Like, this was it. Like, she could feel herself dying. So she decided that she wanted to ensure that the men who did this would be held responsible, and that so she could stop it from happening to somebody else. So as she lay there, she took her finger and she wrote in the sand the name of the two men who had attacked her. Their actual names, because during the commission of the attack, since they assumed they were going to kill her, they started using their real names when talking to each other. So she wrote in the sand, Frans and Theuns. And then below that, she wrote, and I quote, "I love Mom." Alison describes at this point herself floating over her body. She says that she was looking down at her and feeling bad for her, but not registering that what she was seeing was actually herself. She says at that point, she felt like she had a choice to stay or to go, and that she knew that either choice would be okay, like either of them would turn out fine for her, but she chose to stay. So she presumably went back down into her own body where she lay, and shortly after doing that, she saw the headlights of a car in the distance. And that's when she realized that if she was to just get to the road, that maybe somebody would be able to see her, come across her, and help her. She said of this moment, and I quote, "I realized my life was too valuable to let go of, and that gave me the courage to survive." So as Alison tries to get up to get herself help, this is when she realizes the extent of how bad her injuries were. She felt something wet by her thighs. And as she reaches down her abdomen, she feels something slimy protruding from her body. And this was her intestines, dude. Her organs were coming out of her body. Which sounds like the worst it could possibly be, right? But no, I'm so sorry. It gets worse than that. As Alison tried to stand up, she said everything went black because her head started to fall back. She herself says that her head fell between her shoulder blades. And that's because they had cut her neck so deep that she was nearly decapitated. It was literally like a grotesque Pez dispenser, dude. So she had to just grab her own head and hold it on her shoulders. So she's got her head being held in place with one hand, the other hand with the t-shirt that she got off the ground, holding her intestines in. She starts to crawl, realizes that that's not effective, so she stands up and heads towards the road. How? Alison says that during this time, as she made her way towards the road, she collapsed. She fell several times, that she was having a lot of trouble staying on her feet. I wonder fucking why. But that she knew she had to keep going because she knew that if she just made it to the road, at least she'd have a chance. So she did. And she kept going, and she ended up making it to the road where she collapsed. Like, I believe it was either towards the side or in the center. I can't remember exactly. I think it was more towards the side. And she just laid there in hopes that somebody would see her and she would attract the attention of a passing motorist. And luckily, she did. So, as she lays there, a car starts to approach her. And it's at that moment where she realizes that it could be Frans and Theuns that are in that car. But at this point, she didn't even care. She was like, I've done all I can do. I've exerted all the energy I have. I fought as hard as I could possibly fight. So now I just have to lay here and see what happens. The car approaches and then drives right on fucking past her, dude. There's no way that this car didn't see her. They just didn't care enough to stop. I can't even imagine how she felt at that moment, having that car just drive right on past her. But fortunately, she didn't have to feel whatever she felt there very long, because another car came. And this car was being driven by a 20-year-old veterinary student named Tian. And he was actually in Port Elizabeth on vacation, visiting from Johannesburg, I think is how you pronounce it, which is 10 hours away. He says that he believes that God put him on the road that night because of just the sheer odds of it happening. The odds of him being from a totally different area, 10 hours away on vacation, being on that road that night. That person that had at least some medical knowledge, albeit animal medical knowledge, but still being able to do anything to help her. He says that the odds of that are just like it doesn't compute. So he believes that God put him on the road that night. So as Tian and his friends were driving, what they first noticed was just a naked woman in the road. And they realized that they obviously had to stop. They weren't going to just drive past her and leave her there like the first car did. So they get there. He stops the car. He gets out and he goes over and he sits with Alison on the ground. And he keeps talking to her, keeps telling her that she's going to be okay. He's telling her to keep breathing because he can hear how labored it sounds. And he didn't really think that she was going to be okay at all. He just wanted to keep her awake to give her even a fighting chance. Though Tian did not believe that he was really helping her because he didn't think that she would survive, he was helping her. He sat with her until the ambulance arrived. Fortunately, one of Tian's friends that was in the car with him had a cell phone, and apparently at the time this was very new technology for the area and not a lot of people had them, but his friend just happened to have one. So they called an ambulance. And even though the hospital was only 15 minutes away, it took over an hour for the ambulance to get there, which is crazy. They get her in the ambulance and Tian rides with her to the hospital, and he noted that on the way to the hospital, the ambulance driver was driving so slow. So he asked, can we, I don't fucking know, maybe go faster? Have you seen her? And that they were just sort of dismissive in the ambulance and didn't seem to think there was a sense of urgency. It's like they had already determined in their minds that she was going to die, so it wasn't even worth hurrying. So that's pretty upsetting, but I do have some news, a little off subject, but still totally on subject, to give you a little light here, a little mid-video refresher, if we will. And that is that Tian, the man who stopped that night, the man who was going to veterinary school to become a veterinarian, in response to this particular event happening in his life, he actually decided to change career paths. He went from wanting to be a vet to deciding that he wanted to be a doctor after this, because Alison should not have lived. She was in such rough shape. He was holding her thyroid into her neck on the side of the road because it was outside her body, and he was holding, you know what I mean? It was so messed up, but she did live. And so it gave him this feeling of wanting to be part of that, of wanting to look at someone who's so broken and seemingly will not survive and have a hand in putting this person back together. And he did. He became a doctor. So Alison was brought into the hospital, and the doctors finally got to see firsthand just how absolutely destroyed this girl was. And one doctor even said that he had never in his entire 16 years of being a doctor seen a person with injuries that severe. And even when he talked about it years later in a documentary, which I will talk about later, I watched a documentary on this, obviously, so I could see interviews with the actual people, he started to tear up just talking about it. The doctors who worked on Alison and put her back together again attributed to her survival to a miracle. They said they could not explain it, that she was on the brink of death, but somehow she survived. Again, how? I don't fucking know. And not only did she survive, but she remembered everything. She remembered everything about her attackers. She remembered who they were, what they looked like, their names, everything. And while in bed, after going through all those surgeries, whatever they had to do to put her back together, her head sewn back onto her body, she was able to go through a photo lineup and pick out her attackers. She was like, can't talk, all messed up, but They did it, but like non-verbally. It's just so crazy for me to picture that. Her laying in her hospital bed all beaten up, fresh out of surgery, and just being like, those are the fucks who did this to me. It just blows my mind. And anyway, so police who took her initial statement went to their higher-ups, told them the situation. And the prosecution decided that it would be a far more impactful case if the officers could get Alison to verbally state the names of her attackers. Which, like, what the fuck? This woman couldn't talk. Her head was just almost not on her body. Like, what are you even talking about? But they go back, they tell the doctor this. The doctor's like, what the fuck? The doctor tells Alison this. And Alison writes down, take the breathing tube out. Like, take the tube out. I don't know if it was a breathing or an eating tube. Take the tube out. I got some shit to say. So, the doctor doesn't want to do this because the doctor's worried that by pulling out the tube, it could affect all the surgery that they've just done on her throat and stuff. But she said it, they did it. And her first words after having the tube pulled out of her neck was just, that's wonderful. This woman. She followed that with the names of her attackers, Frans and Theuns. Because of her identification, police were quickly able to arrest Frans du Toit and Theuns Kruger, the men who the media had at this point dubbed the Ripper Rapists, and they were arrested on December 19th, 1994. Now, let's really quickly talk a little bit about who these two guys are. There's not like a ton of information, so it is going to be real quick, but I just thought you should know a little bit about their upbringing. Frans du Toit came from a decent family. His father was a police officer, and his family was religious. They were practicing Christians. Well, his family was. By the time he was a teenager, he had gotten himself into darker interests like witchcraft, Satanism, all that shit. He started having dark sexual fantasies also as a teenager, imagining dark, intense rapes while having consensual sex. He was a lazy sort of kid. He didn't really try very much at school, well, except for the fact that he tried to set his school on fire when he was 13 and as a result got expelled. So, he wasn't doing super great at school, you know, getting held back, starting fires, all that not so great stuff, so his family ended up sending him off to the army. But that didn't do well either because he had an issue with the authority aspect of the army. I'm not sure what he expected. So anyway, he leaves the army and he ends up getting a job. He meets a lady, they get married and have a baby. Things are going pretty good for a bit. But then he said, fuck all this easy life and bliss. I'm going to leave my wife because she can't satisfy me sexually. He ends up moving into the area of Port Elizabeth where he gets another job for a time, but gets fired and then decides that, like, fuck it, I'm just going to sell booze myself. So he opened a thing called a shebeen, help South African friends. But from what I understand, this is like an unlicensed bar. So he does just that. He had the idea to open one, so he opened one, and this is where he met a man in 1994, a younger man named Theuns Kruger. Theuns Kruger had a less stable family than Frans did. His father left his mother when she was still pregnant, and his mother was married several times after that when he was growing up. He did claim that one of these stepfathers had physically and sexually abused him, but this has not been proven, and the guy flat out denies it. He wasn't very popular in school and suffered through a lot of bullying and found it difficult to find girlfriends or romantic interests, and this frustrated him and made him angry towards women for rejecting him. Due to this, he developed depression, and due to his depression, he considered taking his own life. He also got heavily into drugs and alcohol to try to cope and make himself feel better, and by the time he had met Frans, he was a wildly unhappy and unmotivated person with poor self-image and was just desperate to try to belong to someone, something, anything. And he decided to find himself in that bottle, as some people, you know, tend to do. And who had a sheben? who could therefore provide said bottles of alcohol? Well, that would be Frans. Before Alison, Frans had actually been arrested for another rape in 1994, another woman who he had abducted in her car. He had taken her, he had raped her, he had then tried to romance her with food and flowers, which didn't work because why would it? And then he raped her again before leaving her alive. But he told her that if she told anyone what happened, that he would kill her. She was quiet for a bit, but after a week, she did come forward. In the same year, there was another attack. This time it was Frans and Theuns. The two of them had abducted and raped a pregnant woman. And during the commission of the rape, they actually told her that they were going to kill her. But they either were bluffing or had changed their mind, chickened out, whatever. They let her live, of course, on the condition that she not say anything to anyone. But she was like, no, fuck that. And as soon as she was able to, she immediately told police what happened. So it was at this point that the two men decided that they were going to keep doing this. They weren't going to stop. Like, come on, don't be crazy. But they weren't going to leave any more living witnesses. Because apparently when you leave living witnesses, they turn you in, right? So at this point, they were going to continue, but they were going to start killing women so that they wouldn't get caught. So they had been arrested. They had been released. They got let out while they awaited trial, which was something that was very controversial for a lot of people once, you know, what happened. And this happened, their release, just weeks before their attack on Alison. So now, both men are arrested. And when asked, like, what am I arrested for, good officer? They tell the men, the officers tell the men, attempted murder. And they're like, attempted? What do you mean by attempted? And that's when they learned that Alison had lived. And they were shocked, to say the least, because they were pretty certain that they had killed her. So to learn that she had somehow survived was completely shocking to them. And they just pretty much immediately gave. They knew, like, what are they going to say? Like, she's alive. She's going to say everything. The police are going to know everything. We can hide nothing. She's alive to tell the story. So they just kind of are like, okay, well, shit, like, let's go. Here's my hands. Let's fucking go. They turn in the knife that they had used to attack her, and they also turned in some jewelry that they had stolen from Alison to the police. One of the pieces actually being a ring of hers that one of them was wearing. I forget which one. Hardly matters. And it still had Alison's blood on it. Once in custody, they also told officers that, like, they weren't planning on stopping what they were doing, and they were actually planning on abducting, raping, and killing another girl, like, shortly thereafter. They were really into what they had done. Now, I don't understand why people always admit this kind of stuff, maybe because they realize that, like, their gooses were cooked. But it just seems odd that they're like, yeah, I did it, and I was gonna do it again. See, you could just be like, no, man, it was like just a one-time thing in an accident. I'm so sorry. But no, they're like, no, we're gonna do it again for sure. So probably good that you caught us. Once arrested, the men were put into a photo lineup for Alison to choose who her attackers were. And apparently the way this used to be done in South Africa is that the victim, English, the victim would actually be placed in a room with the people in the lineup and would have to, like, walk over and touch their shoulder, which blew my fucking mind. I was like, that sounds horrifying. But Alison's case was the first case where they actually used the two-way mirror so she could see through and choose them. And I just thought that was really interesting because hers was the first case where they did that, and they've done it ever since. And Alison looks through this window, this mirror, and she's horrified because this is the first time that she's face to face with these guys again. And though she knows that they can't see her, she knows that they know she's there. And it just made her, it scared her, as, I mean, rightfully so, you know? But without hesitation, she looks at them. She looks at the cop and she's like, 6 and 13. They look different, but that's them. So, once arrested, what excuse do you think that Frans gave to police for why he did what he did? I'll give you a multiple choice real quick, then you can put it down below. 1, he was possessed by demons. The devil made him do it. He was just doing what the demon said. He was into Satanism. Sorry, it wasn't me, it was them. That's A. B, I was fucking repressed sexually. I had a weird relationship with my mother. She was a Christian lady that didn't have Christian values and took advantage of me and made me into what I am. It's not me, it's my mom. I'm so sorry. I just have a really bad childhood. That's B. Or C, I didn't do it at all. That was 100% Theuns. I was barely a part of it. He took me hostage, actually. He's the one who initially took the car, and he told me if I didn't do this, he was going to kill my entire family, and like, I love my family. So I had to do what I had to do. And I wanted to come clean, but I didn't want to die. That's C. Now, if you chose mommy issues, that would have been a really good guess, but it's wrong. He actually said that he was possessed by demons. He's like, I have been filled with demons for years. It's the demons who want me to attack women. It's the demons who want me to kill women. I don't want to do this at all. And because he said that, he ended up actually having an exorcism in prison, which was just wild to me. But during the exorcism, he kept like getting his details wrong, and the things he was saying and doing were inconsistent, so they determined that he wasn't actually possessed. But good try. I guess since you had a possession, you're like cured, right? Cool. So now, the trial of these two men after this murder. No, attempted murder. She shouldn't be alive, so it's wild to even think. But for this attempted murder, attract the attention of South Africans everywhere. There were so many people there at the sentencing hearing that they actually brought in extra chairs that people would all be able to fit, and still people had to stand. There was just too many people. Everybody was like, I gotta see what happens here. Both Frans and Theuns ended up pleading guilty to 8 charges, which included kidnapping, rape, and attempted murder. They were both found guilty, and on August 7th, 1995, Frans du Toit was sentenced to 3 life terms with no possibility of parole, and Theuns was sentenced to 1 life term in prison plus 25 additional years and no parole. And I don't know about you, but those sentences were very refreshing for me to hear. Because I don't know about you, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I see often in like cases that we cover, if somebody is charged with attempted murder, they get such a lighter sentence, like because they weren't successful in actually murdering the person. Not to say that that wasn't their intention, because 100% that's what they were trying to do. But you see that they get like a lighter sentence, and it's like, oh, you suck at murdering, so here's like a less sentence for that reason. Like, do better next time. You know what I mean? So it's refreshing to see these guys get like the punishment for the crime they were intending to commit. Because they wanted Alison dead. She just wasn't fucking having it. The judge who tried their trial, the presiding judge, the presiding judge on their trial also made certain, English is hard. He made sure that a note was put in both men's files that said that he recommended that they never be released, no matter what happens, even if laws change later. Like, his recommendation is that these guys never get out. And he also said that though they were given their life sentences, that he would have felt that the death penalty would have been a fair fate for these two assholes. After the trial, Alison was left sort of not knowing what to do with her life. Like, the trial was done. Everybody had their lives had gone back to normal. They were just going about their business, but she had this like irreversible thing done to her, something that she didn't know how to cope with. She didn't know how to go about life like it was normal, because life wasn't normal for her anymore. This life-changing thing had happened to her, and she just didn't know what to do with herself. And she was directionless, and she fell into deep depression. And she actually ended up moving back in with her mother, because her mother, she said her mom was single at the time and living alone, where her friends had all this stuff going on in their lives. Her mom could be there for her and like help Alison be her focus and help her deal with the physical stuff that she had to deal with, and also the emotional stuff as well. She just had like a lot to recover from, emotionally and physically. Physically, she still, though she lived, she was in great shape. She still had to go in for several surgeries, and she had to go back to the hospital almost every day for different procedures and for physical therapy for a long time. And she even ended up having to have plastic surgery to try to repair what was going on with everything. Obviously, Alison also had a lot of emotional scars that she had to deal with, and emotional trauma that she had to learn to like live with. And she decided that the best way for her to deal with what happened to her was to face it head on and to talk about it as much as possible. After recovering physically, she began traveling around the world, telling her story in at least 35 countries. She was even one of the first women from South Africa to speak publicly about rape in both her home country and abroad, which I've heard, obviously I don't know a ton about South Africa, but I've heard that there is a real problem over there when it comes to rape. There's problems with rape everywhere, but I have heard it spoken about South Africa in specific. Please, if you're from the area, let me know. Educate me, because that is my understanding. But anyways, from doing her speeches, she's helped inspire other survivors to come forward and tell their stories as well. And she has said that each time she's told her story, it has helped her heal a little bit. She said of her attack and her new path, and I quote, "The attack has put me on this path where I get to travel the world and inspire other people." And man, Alison has gone on to be like decorated in so many different ways from her experience and all the work she's done since her attack. In 1995, she won the Rotarian Paul Harris Award for, quote, "Courage Beyond the Norm," and Femina Magazine's Woman of Courage Award. She was honored as Port Elizabeth's, quote, Citizen of the Year. She has written a couple of books about her experience, and many have been written about her by others as well. And her survival story was also made into a movie/documentary called Alison, which I actually watched in preparation for this video. Remind yourself, you do not have to take responsibility for what others do. Life is not a collection of what happens to you, but of how you've responded to what has happened to you. In case I wasn't clear, that was a quote by Alison. I realize I didn't say my and I quote. And I know some of you love it, some of you hate it. So somehow Alison was able to trust a man enough to marry him, and she was married in 1997. And though the relationship didn't last forever, it wasn't like her everlasting love, it did last for a long time. And the couple spent years wondering if Alison would ever be able to have children because of what those men had done to her. It was really up in the air. But after years, Alison was given what she considers to be the greatest gift of her life, and that was not one, but 2 sons. I mean, during her attack, Frans even said that like his intention was to destroy her reproductive organs, which would make it so that this could never happen to her. But he failed, and that's why she said her firstborn, like the first son that she had, was such a gift because of exactly that. It just showed that her body had withstood what he had done and that he had failed in his intent. Are you ready to have just like the sweetest thing in the entire world? A full circle moment that's going to make your heart explode with love? When Alison gave birth to her second son, Tian, the man who helped save her that night, the man who went on to be a doctor because of this whole thing that happened with Alison, he assisted in the birth of her second son. Come on, man. If that doesn't hit you, do you have a heart? I need to know. I need to know. So, though both men who attacked Alison were given life in prison without the possibility of parole, after 17 years, both of them did end up coming up for parole. And now let me explain. I saw online that something new in the legal system in South Africa happened that basically made it so that prisoners who had been given life in prison without the possibility of parole after the year October of 2004 now would have the option to be paroled. So when Frans was going up for parole, this is going to make you crazy. Franz's fiance, because he went and got a fiance while in prison, which you guys know how much I love that and how I feel about that, or maybe you don't, but I feel poorly about prisoners like that being able to be engaged and things like that. But anyway, he got engaged, and his fiance's mother reached out to Alison and asked Alison to help get Frans paroled. Can you even imagine having the audacity to do something like that? That is absolutely ass bananas to me. She didn't do that. She told this lady to fuck herself. I don't know if she told her to fuck herself, but she should have told this lady to fuck herself. But on top of that, Frans found out about the documentary Alison being made. And he was speaking to the creators of the documentary. And he said that he was willing to give an interview for the documentary, which obviously would be like a very great thing to have for a documentary. But he had some stipulations, some demands in exchange for his interview. Now these demands. The first thing he wanted was a signed apology letter from Alison to him. I don't know what the fuck is going on in his head that he thought that that would be a thing. I don't know if he thinks this would look good to a parole board, or if he told his fiance that something totally different had happened. He'd been railroaded and he was in jail for no reason. Don't know what could possibly be going through his head where he would think that was acceptable, but that was his first request. His second request, or demand, whatever, was that he get a portion of all of the profits that Alison has made from book tours, from documentaries, from going on her speaking, her motivational speeches, because he said that if it wasn't for him, she wouldn't have a survivor story to tell. So, the documentary people told him to go fuck himself. I don't know if they really said that, but I would have. And Alison, man, at the thought of these men being released. So Alison has been so strong through everything that's happened for her for years and years and years. She was so strong, so confident, so on top of everything. But this really got to her. The idea that these men could be released really got to her. And it's just because she was able to take comfort in knowing that the boogeymen were behind bars and they would be there forever. This is what she told her sons. This is what she told herself. And the fact that these guys could possibly be released just like cut open those wounds for her. She says that the men show no remorse, for one, and that even if they did show remorse, like, to her, it hardly matters. They did what they did. She has to live with it for the rest of her life, and they should have to do the same. Live with the consequences of your actions for the rest of your life. So, she doesn't think they should ever be released. Although Alison rightfully doesn't like these two men. She says that she has been very lucky that this experience didn't make her hate men, which I agree, especially since she ended up having 2 sons. What's the irony in that? There's such irony in that. But she didn't go on to hate men. She said that though it was 2 men who did this to her that night, it was also a man who found her on the road and saved her. It was also male doctors who put her back together in the hospital. And it was also a male police officer who held her hand through the entire trial to make sure she was okay. Now, if you have not seen the documentary called Alison that I've been referring to during this video, you should. Especially if you're interested in this case, you should really, really watch it. You get to see a lot of first-hand interviews with people that were there, etc., etc. It's available on Amazon Prime. But at the end of this documentary, spoiler alert if you want to see it, it's a documentary, you know the story. Alison pulls out a box, and she says that this box contains all that is left of the Alison that died that day. She opens it up. She pulls out all of the clothes that she was wearing that day that are all bloodied. She pulls out the hunting knife that they had used on her. She looks at them, and then she throws them in the trash. And I thought that that was just a totally beautiful ending. So that, my friends, is the totally unbelievable survivor story of Alison Botha. Can you even believe that shit? I was truly blown away when looking into this case. Every time I thought I was done researching, I was like, well, actually no, because I need to look up one more thing and read one more thing. But at the same time, I didn't want to learn any more information because every fact I learned was more horrible and more horrifying than the last. It was like, look at me, don't look at me. Look at me, don't look at me. Don't look at me. Tell me the truth, but no, lie to me. Actually lie to me because everything that is true is absolutely awful. Like, what a strong ass woman, dude. How did she survive? Tell me how she survived. I don't understand it. The doctors say that it was a miracle. She believes it was angels. I don't know what the fuck I think. I'm glad that she's alive. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative and that it gave you every bit of information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, thank you for hanging out and remembering Alison Botha with me today. What happened to her is so absolutely horrifying. And I know that she's doing well, and I know that she's like in a really good place in her life, but I cannot imagine that this doesn't bother her. This has to be something that sometimes keeps her up at night. I can't imagine a world where she just never, like, it never gets to her. And that's really, really sad. And especially given the fact that these guys could possibly be paroled one day, that's insane. And that, I believe, would be a big mistake. These are very dangerous men. What they did to her was so extreme. The brutality of it was so intense. And the fact that he wanted to ruin her reproductive organs, that shows a deep, deep-seated hatred for women. And I don't know if something like that can be cured or fixed. And quite frankly, these 2 dudes deserve to rot for what they did to her. But anyways, please let me know down below of any cases you would like to see me cover in the future. As this case shows, if you leave me a suggestion, I will try to cover it for you, and if I do, I'll give you a shout out, because I know you're filled with good taste and good ideas. Otherwise, you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you. And if you want to hang out more consistently, I have all my social media linked down below. I have an Instagram, I have a Twitter, I have a Facebook page, and I have a Facebook group. I also link all the makeup I use down below, the earrings I'm wearing down below, nail polish, the link to my merch store. This isn't my merch. This is actually my friend's clothing brand. I'll link it too. Learn to Forget Clothing. You should check it out. They have cool shit. But I will link that, and I will also link my merch store down below in case you want some merch, because I made some merch because you asked for some merch. So get some merch. And with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.